In this module, we will discuss about the establishment of banks in India, their types and functions. After studying this module, you shall be able to know what has led to the establishment of RBI, understand the functions of RBI and critically evaluate the role of RBI, analyze the state of affairs with respect to commercial banks. Let us now discuss the background to the establishment of RBI. The early phase banking activity was carried on in the country by private banks in an unregulated fashion under foreign rulers. Quite expectedly, the banking scenario remained dominated by the bank figures, mergers and disappearances of the small private banks. The requirement for an institution designed to serve all the functions of a central bank was periodically stated. The Royal Commission on Indian Finance and Currency in 1910 invited Keynes to develop a proposal for the central bank. While Keynes was strongly in favor of the idea, the government remained passive till 1925. Due to the war and exchange controversy. A more significant reason, as pointed out by Ray 2000, was the opposition to the idea of an independent monetary authority. Hilton Young Currency Commission in 1926 as well as the Central Banking Inquiry Committee in 1931 strongly recommended the creation of a separate bank to be called Reserve Bank of India, that is RBI. It was set up in 1935. It should be reiterated that so long banks were considered to be no different from ordinary firms. A chaotic phase in the banking arena persisted in the country. The evolution of a central bank in the form of RBI may be interpreted as a product of a slow process of recognition that a bank is fundamentally different from a firm. The significant contribution of RBI to the development of banking sector of the country is acknowledged by an econometric study seeking to explain bank failures before independence. It reported a fluctuating trend in the proportion of bank failed before inception of RBI as opposed to a falling trend in the proportion after the inception. Moving on to discuss functions of RBI. Presence of a central bank has emerged as an imperative for existence and operation of commercial bank due to distinctive features of commercial banks. However, it was gradually realized with passage of time that there are other imperatives for a developing economy, which needed a central bank for its smooth operation. The functions of RBI seek to help the government, the economy and of course the banks. It may be mentioned that the promotional role of RBI in a developing economy goes beyond traditional role of a central bank. First function is RBI as a banker to the government. RBI transacts all banking business of the central and the state governments, which involves the receipts and payments on behalf of the said governments and carrying out of its exchange, remittances and other banking operations. In return, government keep their cash balances on current account deposit with the RBI. As government banker, RBI provides short-term credit to the central and the state governments. As government banker, RBI is charged with the responsibility with the public debt. To the end, it manages all new issues of government loans, services, outstanding public debt and nurse the market for the government securities. The last function is very critical for the borrowing program from the public, which has emerged significant for mobilizing resources for financing public sector projects. RBI, while managing funds for the government through a slow SLR sought to keep the interest cost at a sufficiently low level. This created a conflict of interest between agents supplying funds and RBI acting in the interest of central government in management of public debt. It was argued that creation of a separate independent agency for managing public debt would solve the problem. While the debate continues on the issue in media, coupon rates of interest on the new issues has been progressively raised. Second, RBI as currency authority. RBI has since its establishment the monopoly of issuing currency notes other than 1 rupee notes and coins of smaller denominations which are issued by the Government of India, but put in the transmission through the RBI. Till 1956, proportional reserve system of note issue was followed, under which RBI was required to hold against notes issued at least 40% assets in its issue department in the form of gold and foreign securities not lower than worth of 40 crores of rupees, and only the balance in the form of rupee securities. Such a system was abandoned. Currently, the only binding obligation has been to upkeep at least rupees 115 crores worth of gold as a backup against the currency issued, the rest of the backing being in the form of rupee securities. This has put India on a managed paper currency standard. Third, RBI as a banker's bank and supervisor. In such capacity, RBI statutorily holds a part of the cash reserves of banks in the form of cash reserve ratio, lends them funds for the short period and offers them with the centralized clearing as well as cheap and quick payment services. Normally, banks are required to meet their shortfall of cash from the sources other than RBI and approach RBI only as a matter of last resort. It should be mentioned that the role of central banks as a lender of last resort has been questioned in academic literature. RBI seeks to ensure an orderly development of banking system through supervision and control of commercial and cooperative banks. RBI regulatory functions over banks include licensing, branch expansion, liquidity of assets, management and ways of working, amalgamations, reconstruction and liquidation. The control function of RBI over bank is exercised through periodic inspection of banks and follow-up actions and calling for returns and relevant information from them. While RBI did a commendable job in consolidating the banking system since its inception, the same may not be said about the role of RBI in deregulated banking era. Fourth, RBI as controller of money supply, credit and foreign exchange. A very significant function of RBI as a central bank is to control the total supply of money and bank credit in the best interest of the national economy. It has to satisfy diverse and competing claims on it and rest of the banking system for credit in a way that reconciles diverse and objectives like maximum output and employment as well as price stability, higher rate of growth and distributional justice. To this end, RBI has been using several traditional instruments including open market operations, changes in the statutory cash reserve and liquidity ratios for the bank, control over interest rate structure for the banks and the like. It has been innovative enough to put new instruments like repo rates and reverse repo rates in place for monetary and credit control. Alongside, RBI has to ensure a reasonable balance in the balance of payment of the country. It also has to act as the guardian of the foreign exchange reserves of the country. manages exchange controls and acts as the mediator of the government in regard with India's membership with IMF. Lastly, RBI's promotional role. This goes beyond the traditional functions of a central bank performed by RBI after independence. Such promotional role had two components. The first related to building up and consolidation of the financial infrastructure, filling up the blank institutional gaps through establishment of the new financial institutions and recognizing the existing ones in the light of changing priorities of a developing economy. The second related to creating new measures for inducing allocation of credit for socially preferred directions. The literature acknowledges performance of several non-traditional tasks include performance of the several non-traditional tasks including promotion of commercial and cooperative banking, bill market, rural credit, industrial and export finance, credit to the weaker section and provision of credit guarantee. Now, we will discuss the commercial banks. In the bank-based financial system prevailing in our country, bank occupies a pride of place. The commercial banking segment of our financial system comprises of four distinct components: public sector banks, old and new private banks, and the foreign banks. We will paint the scenario of the commercial banks with a broad brush to bring out the changes in the industry and the consequential impact of such changes. Till the initiation of reforms in 1992, India's PSBs had been operating as if they were the subsidiaries of the government, whose objective was to meet the financial requirement of the state. They operated under the strict guidelines of the RBI, which were all-encompassing. Although most of their deposits came from the private sector, that is households, a major part of their lending was confined to the government, and they also made substantial investment in the government bills and securities. RBI acted as the mediator between the state and the PSBs, more or less determining the amount and the share of the deposit to be allocated to the state and the private sectors. For the private sector lending, it fixed ceiling and floor rates of interest depending on the type of loan, size of loan, type of borrower, nature of collateral, etc. The interest rate often did not reflect the risk of lending. RBI also fixed interest rates on deposits. The bank had little room for making independent decisions in adjusting the interest rates with the risk of lending, especially to the private borrowers. Under this system, there was very limited scope for making profitable innovations in terms of both organizational changes and seeking new sources of funds and new avenues of investment and lending. For a long period, real interest rates were negative for many of these loans. Obviously, vested interest, political and local interventions would creep in order to extract surplus in the system. Since it was not mandatory on the part of the bank to declare NPA or recover loans, and since RBI was happy so long as the bank were able to finance state expenditure, a laxity crept into the banking system. This happened particularly for the kind of private sector lending mentioned above, and in general, profit earning or meeting the interest of the depositors became the secondary objective of the bank. Often, the non-intended borrowers received the loans, and even for the case of some target borrowers, the influential brokers who arranged the loans would take away a sizable amount of the loan disbursed. The borrowers would not be able to repay the loans. Even if they could, they would not be interested in doing so. The broker had to manipulate the system in such a way that the bank could not penalize the borrowers. On the contrary, the bank granted fresh loans to the defaulters so that the debt would roll on. Under these circumstances, it was quite obvious that some personnel of the bank would also try to extract some surplus. Thus, a new institution evolved. The institution involved a nexus of some personnel of banks, brokers and borrowers that would siphon off public money through manipulating banking machinery, state machinery, mobilizing political and local forces. The banks, on the other hand, showed the lost money or the rolling loans as normal assets. The banking institution and their institutional environment that evolved over the decades were therefore not supportive of healthy and innovative ways of making progress by the banks. This being the status of existing PSBs, the policy favor was not in favor creating new PSBs through nationalization and relied on entrepreneurial mode of development of an industry in the form of the entry of new private banks to rejuvenate PSBs. The shortcomings of the public sector banking system, as discussed by the Narasimha Committee of 1991, provide the rationale for financial sector reforms. Despite impressive quantitative achievements in resource mobilization and in extending the credit reach, several distortions have crept in, especially in the financial system. Productivity and efficiency have been eroded in its portfolio quantity had deteriorated. The quality has also deteriorated. Customer service has been poor, work technology remains outdated and transactions cost remained high. In the process, several banks have become weak financially and unable to meet the challenges of a competitive system. Among other things, it was argued in the Narasimha Committee of 1991 that the objective of the financial sector should be competitive efficiency, and accordingly it was suggested that the entry into the financial system should be liberalized. This led to the amendment of Banking Regulation Act in 1993, and the legal barrier to entry into the private banking industry was removed. It represented a supply side factor which by itself was not enough to lead to entry. There had to be some demand side factors which would lead to entry when supply bottlenecks were removed. The indifferent quality of service provided by the public sector banks and the supply of such services by the foreign banks at high prices created a high level of dissatisfaction among the upper middle class segment in the metros. This section had a high opportunity cost of visiting a branch and was ready to pay a higher price for better service instead of an indifferent quality of service at low price. At the same time, they could not shift to the foreign banks, the primary reason being the insistence on the large sum as the account opening and lock-in requirement. It was a situation comparable to landing between the devil and the deep blue sea. There existed a demand for better quality of standard services of a bank, new services and even of new modes of providing the old services, which could only be accomplished through vigorous use of information technology. New entrants entered with new products and services based on the information technology because they believed there would be a market for their new output and expected that economic benefit net of the incurred cost. The literature points out that as a result of entry of new private banks exposed the public banks to force of competition, as a result of which they had put their house in order and changes their conduct in line with the market demand. As a result, the profitability of the public sector bank and the principal objective of the policy makers behind allowing the new private sector banks were fulfilled. However, trouble spots remain for both private and public sector banks. There occurred a tendency on the part of the public sector banks to imitate private sector banks for profits. Their main agenda for the financial inclusion remained neglected, leading to the emergence of microfinance institutions who have been borrowing bank funds for onward lending to the sections hitherto subjected to the financial inclusion. The other interesting development in the deregulated regime, a few old and new banks illegally took more risk and collapsed only to be rescued by the public sector banks. This is what the policymakers least expected. Recently, after a lot of debate whether license should be given to the business houses to own new banks, two entities were selected after due diligence to provide a boost to the financial inclusion. It remains to be seen whether market agents, when appropriately regulated, can lead to the financial inclusion. Moving on to discuss the cooperative banks. First, we will discuss the objectives and structures of cooperative banking system, which are as follows. Initially designed to supplant indigenous sources of rural credit, particularly the money lenders, cooperative banks currently mostly serve the need of agriculture and allied activities, rural-based industries, followed by trade and industry in the urban centers. Cooperative banks have a three-tier structure: primary, credit society, district central cooperative banks, and at the apex level, state cooperative banks. The district central cooperative banks, known as DCCBS, and state cooperative banks, known as SCBs, are the cooperative banks at the district level and at the state level. Each district will have not more than one DCCB, with the number of DCCBs reporting to the SCB. Earlier, these two tiers were also under the supervision of the RBI. However, following the establishment of the National Bank of Agriculture and Development, known as NABARD, in 1982, the supervisory function of these banks has been passed on to NABARD. Primary credit societies satisfying certain specified criteria can apply to RBI for a banking license to operate as urban cooperative banks. Urban cooperative banks, known as UCBs, are registered and governed by the state government under the respective Cooperative Societies Acts of the concerned states. They are also covered by the provisions of the Banking Regulation Act of 1949 and hence come under the control of the RBI as well. While a host of managerial aspects of these banks, including registration, management, administration, recruitment, amalgamation, liquidation, etc., are controlled by the state governments, matters related to banking are governed by the RBI directives. Traditionally, the area of operation of primary urban cooperative banks is confined to metropolitan, urban or the semi-urban centers and caters to the needs of small borrowers, including SSIs, retail traders, small entrepreneurs, professionals and the salaried section. Now, let us look into the problem faced by the cooperative banking system. The section is divided into three parts. The first one refers to a very typical problem not being shared by any other banking segment. In fact, this factor goes a long way in explaining the conduct of such banks which adversely impact their performance. It is reflected in the fact that only a few states account for a major part of the business. The second component refers to the problem relating to the business environment in which they have been operating. The most typical problem faced by these banks relate to a governance issue. They have more than one regulator in the case of UCBs. Regulators include RBI and the Registrar of Cooperative Societies of the respective state, and in the case of the district and the state cooperative banks, we have NABARD, the RBIs and the RCS. Given the close links between politicians and cooperatives and the fact that the RCS functions under the state government, in practice this dual or the triple custody of the health of cooperative banks has in practice led to the poor supervision and control. Also, most cooperative banks are lacking in skill and expertise. Recruitments are politicized, as are appointments at most levels. Income recognition and prudential norms that were introduced for commercial banks in the early 90s were also not extended to the cooperative sector. Undue political interference has led to very poor quality of loan assets. The banks are unduly dependent on refinancing facilities from the government, RBI and the NABARD, and not on capital mobilized from members. Intervention by the government has stood in their way of becoming a self-reliant and resilient credit system. Active participation by the member is lacking in day-to-day operation. The common attitude of the public is to treat it as a source of funds when other sources are closed. With expanding credit needs of the rural sector, emergence of the commercial banks as competitors of cooperative banks has aggravated their difficulties. It is not surprising that often cooperative banks hit the headline for the wrong reasons. Now, we will study the initiatives for the reforms. RBI has suggested creation of single regulatory body for such banks, but such a proposal became a victim of the institution of the power politics which afflicts cooperative sector in the country. RBI and the government has initiated a host of measures for their improvement. A number of cooperative banking reforms have been introduced since 1991. A number of committees as well had submitted their well-intentioned report. Without sorting out the governance issue of multiple regulatory bodies, a fundamental change, nothing will work for better for cooperative banks. Let us now summarize what we have studied in this module. Unregulated and chaotic banking system gave way to the establishment of RBI in 1935 through building up of public opinion and recommendations of few committees. Vital functions are performed by the RBI to the government, economy and banking system. Such functions go beyond the ambit of an ordinary central bank. In India, there exists a bank-based financial sector. Banks are of two types, commercial and the cooperative banks. Commercial banks are dominated by the public sector banks and they had a mandate for financial inclusion. While they went on a massive branch expansion across the country, it was not in the interest of the profitable operation of such banks. They were insulated from the competition for a long time and were mainly used for the RBI for mobilizing resources for government through high statutory liquidity ratio. A nexus of some personnel of banks, brokers and borrowers that would siphon off public money through manipulating banking machinery, state machinery, mobilizing political and local forces. This led building up of this extremely high level of NPAs and made commercial banks unviable. As a result of the implementation of Narasimha Committee, which came in 1991, the public sector banks were exposed to the competition from the new private banks. Under the cold shower effect, they were forced to reorient their conduct in line with the market requirement and improve their performance. However, some of the new and old private sector did not follow proper corporate governance and hence emerged unstable with the imminent closure. Some of them had to rescue by being merged into the public sector banks. After long deliberations, two new private sector banks were allowed to enter to promote financial inclusions. Cooperative banking system is characterized by three-tier structures. They face a number of typical problems including multiple regulators which affect the conduct and profitable operation. Steps taken to improve their functioning fall short of the requirement while they represent the weakest link in the banking industry and continue to hog the limelight for the wrong reasons.